Good morning, everyone. We'll get started in just a minute here. We're going to let folks into the room. All right, it looks like our numbers are kind of stabilizing here, so we'll go ahead and get started. So good morning and good day. Thank you so much for attending the third day of CALM. We're so happy to have you here. My name is Danny Cook, and I'm one of the co-organizers of the conference. I'll also be the moderator for your session today. So before we get started today, we want to acknowledge the grief that many of our colleagues are experiencing today with the murder of 8 people, including 6 Asian women in Atlanta yesterday. We stand in solidarity with all of our Asian American and Pacific Islander colleagues, and we grieve with you. We would like to take a moment of silence to honor these people, and especially the women, and all of those who have experienced violence against their communities, and reflect on the ways that we must stand against racism and hate. So I'd like to invite you to take a moment of reflection with me right now. Okay, thank you very much. For those who feel able, we encourage you to educate yourself about the pernicious anti-Asian violence in this country. I'm going to put 2 links in the chat here in just a moment that we would recommend for you. And we'd also encourage you to take action and train to become an active bystander. We recommend an active bystander intervention training that is free through an organization called Hollaback, and I will put that link in the chat as well. Thank you so much for taking the time to reflect with us this morning. And with that, we'll move on to our programming. So I'm very happy to welcome you to Library Culture Overhaul, Practical Steps for Leaders, with our 2 speakers today, Emily McElroy, the Dean, and Emily Glenn, the Associate Dean of the Leon S. McGugin Health Sciences Library at the University of Nebraska Medical Center. So thank you, Emily and Emily.
Thank you so much, Danny and team. We're really happy to be here, and thank you. Thank you for your kind introduction and those moments of reflection. It's our pleasure to be part of this really terrific conference, and I know the time is right for me to hear these messages, and it sounds like things are resonating for so many of us out there too. Emily and I both are really excited to continue the conversation and talk about library culture overhaul and some of the practical steps. So yes, you'll hear from me. I'm Emily Glenn, my boss and the Dean of the Library, Emily McElroy. We are joining you from Omaha, Nebraska. And Omaha, Nebraska is kind of what I say is in the middle. I am on the campus of the University of Nebraska Medical Center, and Emily's about 4 miles away. And I want to acknowledge this space where we are today and the land that we're using. It's part of the former territory of the Umpqua, Omaha, Ponca, Pawnee, Oto, Missouri, and Iowa peoples. And the image here is of Standing Bear Lake, named for Chief Standing Bear, who had a major role in assuring the recognition of Native Americans being granted civil rights under American law. So with greetings and recognition from our place here in Omaha. I want to start by sharing just a couple of thoughts around some of the things that make up the definition of culture, and some of the things that by extension make up kind of climate. And so just kind of covering some of the basics of some of these and reflecting as we go on in the conversation, I think will kind of help us sort out what goes where, what we can think about impacting, and then what is kind of some of the other things that just might happen with time and trial and with other kinds of interventions. So thinking about culture and culture of a workplace in particular, this is where we get to the proper with big air quotes about the things that make things work within the organization for a certain time in a certain setting. These are the beliefs by established by leaders, then communicated and reinforced through the job descriptions, position reporting, assignments. And it works well enough for us to continue doing it and to teach other people that this is the way that we do it. And there's so many caveats to everything in there, but working well enough and well enough for whom, et cetera. But our organizational culture really It sets the context for the things that we do within our library, if we're talking about our organization at the university. And then the organization of the library really sets the context for the things that happen at the departmental and smaller group level. And so we see kind of these nesting effects of the different places where we get our information about what our culture is. Um, our culture is expressed in several different ways. A couple of these three buckets kind of describe the ways of social, material, and ideological culture. Social culture is really about our roles and responsibilities and our distribution of power. Material culture is the stuff that we make and how we work together to make the stuff and the goods and the services that we deliver in our libraries. And then our ideological culture is really kind of the fundamental things that we kind of express in our truths and at our core. And that might be, for example, that libraries lead the way for information literacy at universities, or library staff do honor privacy this way. It's fundamental. It's our guidelines. It's kind of these things that are like, this is us. This is how we um, act in this culture. So it's all of these things tied up for by and acted within all of these people at an organization. Um, by kind of the next step in this, and kind of the next layer, is then the climate. Climate's how the members of the organization and members of the unit here, in our case the library, how we view and express the things that might be described as the mood or the atmosphere. This is kind of the thumbs up, the thumbs down, the Glassdoor kinds of ratings, the pulse, the mood, how it is day to day. When people say, well, what's it like to work there? It's that kind of climate that they're really talking about. So it sits atop and alongside culture. A positive climate then would be, our general positivity, connection, responsiveness, trust, consideration, so many of the things that we've heard um, discussed in these other conversations. And we also think of it too as what is the feedback and action over time? What are celebrations, and what does kind of support feel and look like? Um, we, we're going to be looking at and discussing kind of um, a lot of the ways that we've addressed different things in culture and how that has impacted climate, and then kind of some of the issues around that. I want to just jump in and kind of be the first half of our two-part speaker bit here, and share a little bit about my journey toward becoming a manager, and using some of um, the leadership things that one builds over time. Um, my transition to leadership in libraries is really it's been iterative. It's been over a long period of time. It's been informed by different people and places where I've worked, peers, intentional practice, study, so much iteration. I've worked in places that have seen me and fostered growth, and also places where there's just this really down climate and a culture that made a place feel really disorientingly toxic. I think we know that it sticks. And sometimes I found myself in over my head and kind of where I wanted to be, as far as where uh, where leadership motivations were, and where opportunities were for managing, and where I might have found myself in a workplace. And just kind of searching for that alignment led me to the place I am now, which I've been here for about 5 years, and in an academic library position, moving toward more management and more supervisory things, and of course enacting some of these leadership practices. But there was a point where I wasn't really sure how my values and kind of what I was bringing from um, other workplaces, and kind of some vision of where I wanted to be, how that was all aligning. And so using a life coach kind of helped kind of identify where are some of these opportunities, where are faults, what are priorities, and reflecting on those, and kind of thinking about what the desire is to bring that into a workplace, and how you can use this combination of experience for good, and act within those systems that keep culture moving, and bring those tools together successfully to really enact change. And I think that's motivation for why we do the work of being managers, of being supervisors. But there's also this kind of this kind of this kind of cycle of growth where you can practice and see change, and there's some fulfillment in that. Um, I really lean on very beneficial relationships with other people. It's been peers. I've had a mentor for for different mentors over different periods of time. One of the organizations or one of the programs that I want to call out is the National Libraries Medicine Association of Academic Health Science Libraries Leadership Fellows Program, which was really important in the past year and a half or so, as I worked with a cohort of other medical librarians who are in rising leadership and managerial positions in other libraries. And just my takeaways from that is that having a cohort really makes a difference. Having an opportunity to really dig into and wrestle with your own values, the context of your place, some of the tensions going on, the bigger themes of libraries, what it means to be a manager. It helps solidify some of the um, I think, confidence around testing some of these strategies in an environment. And so I feel like I have had, maybe in contrast to Emily McElroy here, an opportunity to test, retest, ask a lot of kind of reflection things as I'm going along. And I think that having a relationship with my library dean, boss, and being able to say, well, what happened here when you see this kind of thing, what's going on, and learning and reflecting from that has really contributed to kind of a lot of this this work of being involved in leading with more confidence and being part of the change of culture, and understanding more about what our context means to us at the library here. I want to share a little bit about where I've gone with that and kind of what's developed. In the past couple of months, we had kind of a small reorganization where I saw the people in my department, the number of them increased by 50%. And then in that time, I had an opportunity to have conversations with people who are going to be managers reporting to me. And this conversation came up like, what do you expect? How can we work together? And recognize that there is an opportunity to relate to them as supervisor, direct report instead of just peers. And so in kind of shifting that, I prepared a document that kind of helped drive some of this conversation of, how can we work together well? What are some of the kind of not milestones, but what are some of the signposts as expectations go? And so I shared a document with folks called Expectations. But the way that this helps me is that this really brought together things that I had seen and learned and practiced in this environment, and thinking about how I want to work with staff and some of the things that I hope that they will be able to do to help us all work effectively together. And so, my key driving point for me is that I want to be able to say, this department is good for all of us. This library is a good place to work. And even if it's rough outside, the library, when it's us in here, we have the culture and the ability to kind of act and grow and advocate and give space to people to make awesome careers at University of Nebraska Medical Center. So we'll share more here about our journey and a lot of those steps. And Emily?
So, and I just want to add that we will be sharing the slides after the conference is over. So my first library leadership position was 20 years ago, and I've gradually expanded responsibilities with each position, working in a variety of libraries. I arrived at UNMC 7 years ago, and when I accepted my current position as dean, I thought, this is great. Now I'm in charge. I can create the library culture that I've always wanted, especially after working in places that maybe had less than ideal circumstances. What I didn't realize is creating that culture can take many years and a lot of hard work. So my management philosophy coming in was fairly simple, and based on what I observed in people I had worked with over many years. Emily, can you move to the next slide? So the first is be authentic, and we've heard this throughout the conference. People know when you're faking it. It's important to be yourself. Take time to know the people working into the library, especially if you're going into a new environment. Stand behind your principles. I have found this is a lot harder than it looks, especially if your institution takes a different approach than you would like. And sometimes you're told, step into line. Listen to people when they come to you. One of the best managers I ever had was someone who would put whatever she was working on aside, sit at a table away from her desk, and just really listen. Check your personal stuff at the door. Over the years, I have observed a lot of people never knowing who is going to show up that day. You know, the really angry, irritable boss, or the one who wants to be your best friend. So hide your moodiness, compartmentalize what is going on. This doesn't contradict being authentic, because this type of unpredictability affects everyone around you. They pick up on your moods. You are a role model. People watch you and your reactions. I think about when I was a staff member and how I would look to the leaders to see how they responded to people, especially in meetings. That is now what people are doing with me. So I've had to maintain a poker face, which can be hard. And people want to see you engaged with them. At one position, I did a lot of managing up. I had to tell our director many times that everyone was noticing how he would fall asleep, be scrolling through Facebook, and so on. And everyone would walk into those meetings already tense and irritated and focused on how he was reacting, which is not the environment you want. Focus on the big picture. That is what people want from you, not to interfere in their areas where they are now the experts and not you. Be transparent, maintain a sense of humor as appropriate, and help people find resources and build bridges across campus. That's one of the key things as a leader. And foster collaboration across departments rather than pitting people against one another. And work to lift people up rather than drag them down. So I haven't really changed my philosophy much in the last 7 years. Some areas have been more of a challenge than others. And I have a lot more sympathy for people who I used to criticize, because it can be hard to please so many people, balance the needs of the institution, and take care of my own mental health. And I've found myself in situations similar to when I saw someone make a major mistake, or I felt they were making a major mistake, and realize I almost did the exact same thing. With every position I've taken, I've had to make some adjustments based on the group I work with. So, for example, I'm a pretty sarcastic person. And some consultants told me that my sarcasm alienated people who didn't understand my dry sense of humor and felt uncomfortable knowing that others did. And at first I was really upset and defensive, saying I couldn't change something so central to me. But then I realized, is my sarcasm really that important when it was obviously causing problems for other people and in a culture I was trying to improve? I also had to accept that management is not as easy as it looks. You just can't make it work with some people, and they will not like you no matter what you do. And I had to learn to let it go and focus on everyone else. The library culture I inherited was one in need of major change. I couldn't help but compare what I inherited from what our keynote speaker, Katrina Davis Kendrick, outlined. And there were 4 main areas that needed addressing: communication, empowerment, structure, and accountability. Actually, if you want to stick with. So communication was strained between departments and from leadership to everyone else in the library. What was happening on campus was not regularly shared with staff. So people were working in a vacuum and everything was very top down. People did not feel comfortable expressing their opinions or suggesting improvements. And the organization was very management heavy, with too many units that created inefficiencies, and everyone worked in silos. And yes, we're in Omaha, so we have to show some farm silos here. People did not have many resources for professional development, staff training, or even clear expectations of their role in the library. Accountability wasn't evenly applied, which affected everyone who was working hard. I don't want it to sound as if I inherited a place with bad people. I didn't at all. I inherited a place with a bad climate for really, really great people. I knew from my interview that people were unsettled and desperate for change. And I thought, okay, it'll take about a year to make some of these changes. But And I identified some quick changes that would let people know that they could trust me. I'm not sure how I would have reacted then if I had been told that it would take closer to 5 to 6 years for those changes to really take hold. So what were some of the things I did as dean to create change? I first started addressing the 4 areas where I saw possibilities for immediate changes that really fit my management style. I relied on internal tools for these changes. So first I began with the library organization, communication, decision-making, and organizational structure, and then strategies to engage staff, because if I implemented changes in these areas, everything else I felt would follow. With communication, I wanted a culture where we shared information. Next slide, thanks. So everyone would have a better sense of what was happening on campus and in the library. I wanted them to know more about their colleagues and areas of expertise. 7 years ago, this would have been a very difficult question for people to answer, questions on the spot about another department, but now people can do it with ease. We worked on giving elevator speeches, and so that just really helped people so they could answer information on the fly. We shared the same building as the chancellor, and so I wanted everyone to feel comfortable that if he asked a question, they could answer it. I also wanted people to bring back information to the library, and that is including me. So we enhanced our intranet where everyone began sharing meeting minutes of campus and library meetings. I don't sanitize what I put in there about library or campus administration, as just one example. A monthly report is distributed that covers accomplishments, trends, professional activities, projects that have been started or progress of current ones, and then a question of the month. And it's an expectation that everyone participates in the monthly report. If departments weren't meeting, I asked them to start regularly meeting so everyone would receive information at the same time rather than just a chosen few. I wanted to remove a culture of favoritism and who was in the know. I created a committee structure around key areas that included people across the library and with equal representation of faculty and staff. We created a library council with elected staff and faculty representatives to represent non-management and policy decisions. And while we've changed some of our committees and ended library council, they filled a purpose in getting the library on track. And our current committee structure works. It gives people a chance to have leadership opportunities as chairs, engage with people across the library, and break down the differences between faculty and staff. It also demonstrates that I want involvement from everyone. So another part of my management philosophy is transparency. And when I make decisions, I always try and explain why I made them. I ask the same of the library managers. I don't want everything a mystery, especially when it is a decision that goes against what people in the library may want. The budget is an important area where I believe transparency is important. The budget can be scary because it affects jobs, income, or resources. And not knowing the library's budget can create distrust. It also prevents people from effectively managing their areas if they don't have the context behind things. So when I walked into my job, I discovered no one knew the budget, including the associate deans. The head of collections was told how much she had to spend, but was never given an opportunity to ask for additional funds or even know the fund sources for collections. Now everyone in the library, whether they like it or not, receives a quarterly budget update that outlines all our expenditures and revenue sources for that quarter. Managers have oversight of their budgets. And when we learn of budget cuts, I'm transparent with how we're going to meet them. And I provide reassurances when I can or when I can't. The other thing is, I believe that a successful organization is one that values the opinions of everyone contributing to the organization's success. And I want everyone working in the library to feel empowered. Moving into a dean role meant that I was no longer on the front lines working with staff or our users. I wasn't embedded in a department anymore, and that was a huge shift for me. Everyone else were experts in their areas, just like I had once been an expert in my former positions. And I have to rely on everyone to be empowered to express their opinions on what works, doesn't work, and the best way to satisfy the needs of our users. I insisted that we would become a bottom-up organization and no longer top-down. I wanted decision-making from all levels, and I eliminated unnecessary layers. And this is the area that has been the most challenging to change. And again, going back to the keynote, people had been working with leaders who had more of an authoritarian style. And people were so accustomed to being told what to do and that their opinions didn't matter that many people had just shut down. And I would get so frustrated the first few years of my job, wondering, why staff didn't trust me enough to speak up. And I looked at it as a failure on my part and something about me. And I finally realized that it just takes time. The previous library culture had silenced some strong, thoughtful, and creative people. So I had to identify strategies for encouraging people to talk and create a space where they would know I valued their opinions. And part of that was measuring my responses. So when ideas came up that I felt a little iffy about, I didn't dismiss them right away. I really tried to look at it from their perspective, and I gave space for those ideas. We have spent a lot of time working on strategies to engage staff. It is through that engagement where I feel people will become more empowered. I already mentioned committees, and Emily will talk about our strategic planning, but we also develop staff engagement activities to bring people together, and I highly recommend doing that with GOATs. And these activities have been even more important during the pandemic because we don't want to lose that connection, especially with people who joined the library right before we had to go work remotely. I also made myself available one-on-one to work with people. And this was critical the first few years of my role. It is also the area where I definitely received the most criticism. People craved one-on-one attention, and they wanted to see me and for me to see them. And at times I would find it frustrating because if I walked around the library all day talking to people, I would never get anything done. So I was defensive about my schedule. It was the early stages of my tenure where I had to present more on campus to build connections and be visible. So I felt pulled in just so many directions. But then I had to take a step back and remember how, as a library staff person, we viewed library leaders who never came to our department or would walk through and never say a word as if we didn't exist. So as a leader, I saw the other side, well, except for not acknowledging people. I didn't see that. I also recognized that not everyone was the same. Seeing me walk around also disturbed other people. Am I doing something wrong? Doesn't she have enough to do? She just walks around with a cup of coffee. So I was probably the most defensive about this area because I struggled to find that balance of meeting the needs of everyone. So even now I remind myself at least once a day to walk around pre-pandemic and paying attention to details about people, their accomplishments, things shared by their manager, what they put in the monthly report. And as a manager, you have to focus on the human side. It helps with engagement, but it also demonstrates that you do care about the people who are working with you. They're more likely to trust you and to speak up about library matters if they see you as a regular person just walking around and saying hi. A major tool that I've used to gauge the library's climate and how we're doing is our campus engagement survey. The year after I started, the survey was conducted, and it's held every 2 to 3 years by our campus human resources. And I was pleased with the improved scores from the one held before I started. So I knew we were on the right track. But while our scores were high, I wanted more detail. Like, how did our staff define an effective leader? What was effective communication? So we created our own follow-up engagement survey that was built around open questions around 7 different areas. And after I received the anonymous results, I combined the comments, and the management team identified patterns and developed action items. And we held ourselves accountable to all staff by reporting on our progress. I also wanted to show staff that I take these survey results seriously. So it isn't just one more of those surveys we fill out where nothing changes. A few years later, campus ran the survey again, and I was really interested in these results because we had gone through a major reorganization, some people had left, and we were dealing with some pretty big challenges. And we had the highest satisfaction scores of any other unit on campus. But I wasn't satisfied. We did the same thing with a follow-up survey and action items. And for me, the surveys serve as an important benchmark of how we're doing as an entire library. I have less control over how people view campus leadership, but I want to know they're happy coming to work and satisfied with their contributions. Another important tool I used in immediately addressing climate issues revolved around HR practices. Within my first month of starting at UNMC, I looked at our pay structures and I identified pay equity issues among our faculty. I was direct with the people who needed an increase in pay that I would make it happen, and here's the amount of time it would take. I worked with campus human resources to examine staff levels and created new ones so people would experience a career path in their job. I also held people accountable. I overhauled the evaluation system so it would have true meaning and was connected to annual raises. I asked for meaningful goals. We brought in someone to do a staff training on setting goals because this was not something that they had ever done before. We implemented a mid-year review so everyone would have an official check-in on their progress. And when situations come up that need immediate attention, managers receive training and support for addressing them right away. And this had a direct effect on people who had low morale from seeing poor performers get rewarded. Obviously, it made some people unhappy and some people left, but most people felt they had a better understanding of what was expected of them and were happy knowing that they would receive meaningful feedback and recognition. And I turn it over to Emily to cover the next part.
So a couple of the places where we decided to make some significant changes with regard to paths for new employees and for existing employees were in our recruitment and onboarding procedures and our paths to promotion. In our recruitment and onboarding procedures, we enacted several things that were great departures from the templates that we had on hand and that had been used in the past. So we really wanted to focus on bringing in diverse pools of candidates, for example, having clear communication, acknowledging all of the different ways that people might come to a career in librarianship. We did a lot of the very specific things that we've heard about probably in other sessions that focus more specifically on this process. Such as sharing our names as committee members, using clarity on the salary in our ads, discussing what's happening at every step along the way. For Zoom calls, back then, this was about a year ago, we didn't require a camera to be on, for example. We also improved and solidified our code of confidentiality, outlining absolutely zero tolerance for discussion of the candidates or gossip about candidates or any speculation. And we had all library staff sign this before every single candidate came in for the interviews. We aim to be welcoming and as partnering with our potential new hires as we would be as if they were already working here, and we wanted to keep them here. Moving on to practices that we enacted with onboarding once people were on board is that we really kind of looked toward a year-long process. And we had very specific steps along the way, from meeting with people for every 2 weeks, that kind of very beginning kind of who, what, where, how do I kind of figure out what's going on here, to a monthly plan that goes toward longer range things to sort out what are the important things that you're going to be doing, who are you doing them with, what are the priorities. We also help develop 3 very high level priorities for new staff that will take them through the year and help them arrive at their first annual evaluation a year later, that they'll be able to reflect on. And so this is all created in a shared document that is a living document that is part of a weekly check-in with the new person who's hired and contributes to their kind of steps towards success in their position. So we really have tried to wrap around a lot of those very specific changes to help people be successful. And paths to promotion too, we think about just their straight promotion and tenure, and we've seen different levels of support for folks that are entering into that. We find that P&T is a great mystery unless you're really you've been through it or know someone who has. And so we try to demystify that by having meetings early and often, also talking about the promotion and tenure process in our faculty meetings, and bringing in different speakers to help us imagine different ways to find success in our faculty positions, such as we had a speaker come in and talk to us about developing a research agenda. How do you approach kind of having this career that you have to keep track of, document, and then kind of present as an accomplishment, as a big step. So we aim to be partners with faculty members who are going through the promotion and tenure process. We also look for other opportunities for staff promotion, like Emily mentioned. we have opportunities for identifying different ways to engage staff in their interest areas and for listen to opportunities for ways to keep improving the work that we're doing in the library and allow some mobility for different staff members. Emily?
So an important external tool that I've used 3 times in the library is bringing in consultants to look at things. And after I'd been in my position for 6 months, I knew I had to make some major changes to the organizational structure. And my boss recommended, he's a provost, he recommended I hire some consultants because I could receive more buy-in from people who were objective. And I found 2 people I knew from my professional network who I trusted. I also selected them because I knew they would solicit input from everyone based on their personal styles. They're very warm, empathetic people. They're also really savvy at drawing things out, such as my sarcasm. And people opened up to them like they had not with me. And their report uncovered that problems were worse than I thought. And while I was discouraged, they also presented solid recommendations that came directly from everyone they interviewed. And having the consultants report helped campus leaders support me in making personnel changes. As an example, it helped in talking with human resources about why we needed to look at different staff career paths and so on. It also let campus leaders know what I was facing and that I would have some divided attention for a while until I could get things in the library in better shape. I changed the organizational structure by flattening it. I moved some supervisors out of their roles. I moved people into different jobs where they were better suited and are still much happier many years later. And we created library norms based on the concerns raised by staff. And because the recommendations came from the majority of staff, they saw that I was serious about listening to them and really trusted that I would follow through. I've brought in consultants 2 or 3 times to look at different departments, and it wasn't to change the structure or get rid of any positions, but to have experts look at our workflows and make recommendations. And they were areas where I knew we had some issues, but it was either an area where I had a knowledge gap or I needed an objective perspective. And all 3 times have been very successful. Staff have always been engaged in this process by working with the consultants and freely sharing their opinions. And the recommendations have usually been implemented. And as needed, I have shared them with key stakeholders, such as my boss or human resources. Emily? You're muted.
We used a number of tools to get through some of these change processes and to bring different opportunities to staff to engage, to be more, to be part of the team, to communicate effectively with one another, to build trust, to do all these things that we had for goals. And so I say we, but I really kind of speak to the library administration staff and the team of people that really manage the opportunity for these tools to come to the library. So one of the first tools that we used was a cap and workout. And cap and workout is CAP stands for Change Acceleration Process. It's a model that was put forth by General Electric, and this was brought to the University of Nebraska Medical Center, and the library was able to tap into experts who came to the university and who were working with different departments. What we were able to get from the workout part of this learning opportunity was that there are several specific activities that we can engage as managers to help staff and to help our manager-staff relationships become more fluid as we talk about how to move forward together. We were specifically looking at how to improve communication, how to get people to speak up, how to hear those ideas from the creative folks who maybe had been shut down in the past. We wanted people to gain more confidence, be able to practice building confidence with each other. And so this group environment provided an opportunity for us to practice some of these things. And so we, for example, in frame, out of frame is a kind of low stakes way to look at a number of ideas and decide, hey, does this really fit within this bubble? And that's a kind of way to practice talking about what we see in front of us without maybe naming someone has a bad idea or this is something that's totally off the wall. we can just kind of talk about, is this generally fitting? Another strategy that we picked up on was our 15 words, and we use this to develop our library mission and vision statement shortly after we did the kind of cap and workout process. And it's a fun activity that elicited a lot of words from staff and a lot of different ideas on how people were reflecting on what we should do and should be. So this opportunity was really helpful in giving us some tools in our toolbox, and for library managers to be able to reach in and say, oh, this is a chance to use this kind of thing. We could see how this fits. We did in a way cherry pick from the option of things that were available to us in the whole palette of workout related tools. But we had a team of leaders that were able to guide us to the ones that would work for us here in the library for where we were. Another tool that we used was we called it a communication workshop, and we don't call it improv. Improv is a scary word to a lot of people on staff, but what we actually did was get people together physically this is before pandemic times, in a space, and work together to practice some silly scenarios, some low stakes scenarios, some scenarios with suggested topics, some things to respond to, and just getting people to think outside of the day-to-day structures and those really rigid lines, and have a little bit of fun with each other. We found that because this was facilitated by someone who is outside of the library, we could let loose and not have the direction and the relationship and being like guided or judged. There were many people who had never participated in anything that required them to be on stage and even talking and acting or being silly in front of a group. This was definitely a place to stretch, and we've repeated these kinds of workshops and really focusing on communication and play a couple of times in the library. And some library members have even taken from this and gone on to other spaces in the university to help others learn these techniques. One thing that has worked for us time and time again, and that we have been continuing to learn from and learn with, is around design thinking. We had some design thinking folks from the Omaha area come to us at the library and work with us to really rev us up for a 3-year strategic planning session that was going to be really intense. We wanted to build on staff's previous training in communication and kind of practicing some of those wild ideas, and see how we could harness some of that and turn it into where are we going and what are we going to do together. So a lot of these tools, we really got from design thinking for libraries, but we also had other design thinking expertise and training for some of the library staff. All of the Post-its, the drawings, the kind of imagining stories about our users and discussing them together has helped us to kind of revamp what we know, or what we think we know about our users, and what we think about the ways that we serve them. And so this places us in a really kind of interactive place. We just finished a recent round of design thinking series of trainings that we've done on the Zoom, in a Zoom platform. And that is, again, setting us up for another round of 3-year strategic planning. Other tools that we've used with folks when we're talking about kind of culture and communication is really around how are we making space so that people can bring their whole selves to work? How can they be their whole selves in their career? What does it look like when we're interacting with each other and being aware of each other as individuals, aware of the space that we work, and how we can support one another? Danny had mentioned hollaback training and the bystander training at the beginning, and we did use this in our training. We have our staff development program has integrated kind of several of these. We've kind of got a program around learning, but we also had encouraged people to attend sessions such as Good Enough Now, which is really focused on inclusion and respect. We recently did an intercultural development inventory, and that was offering by the HR department of the university. And it's an inventory that asks you to reflect on different perceptions or different ways that you think about dimensions of culture, and then kind of analyzes, are you at a kind of an early kind of I want to say mature and immature, but there's really a whole spectrum of where you fall in your awareness of culture and how you can reflect on and where you can improve your kind of learning and your ability to kind of to be more expansive in how you approach culture and culture in the workplace. And then we also have a really robust staff development training program that we've had everyone in the library participate in at various times, and this includes tools for managers and just various kind of time management and the whole spectrum of kind of professional development things that we might find that can apply to more staff. Our reasons behind using all of these tools, I think these are kind of maybe familiar at this point. We're getting to build trust, and that trust is happening in so many different levels with folks. We're getting them to engage with each other and to try out different things that aren't necessarily in those really tightly bound work lanes. Empowering folks to share their experiences, share their share their thoughts on how to make things different, how to kind of explore change. Distributing decision making was really moving from that top down to the bottom up, helping to surface those ideas, those strengths from staff, and building leaders while we're doing so. We know that that leaders can really emerge from projects, from different kind of opportunities that come up, different things that have to be led, such as our community work that Emily had mentioned before. And we found that these tools really, this is both meeting our goals and also contributing to continuing to meet our goals. They help with staff cohesion. Some of these activities and tools that we used actually had a component of fun and play that allowed us to connect to people in different ways. And so we're able to kind of get double benefit in that way. We have, I mentioned kind of a staff development training program. We have one person who's in charge of corralling some of those opportunities. And those have so far focused on a lot this year on our major areas of diversity, equity, and inclusion, and looking toward development of faculty. And we've had a nice kind of full calendar of opportunities there. And so we have a team of, it's Emily and myself and one other person where we direct what those opportunities are going to look like for staff, and they're mandatory. We give people kind of the introduction to what's going to happen. We have about an hour for each session, and then we've been doing those about monthly. And so that program has really helped us kind of formalize some of these training and tools use opportunities that we put in front of staff. One of the things that we did kind of in conjunction with our library staff development program, and also because we identified that this is something that we wanted to do at the unit level, is to conduct a library climate survey. And we recognize that the campus survey, like that Emily talked about, and the campus climate survey, which is kind of a different tool, that these weren't really helping us to answer the questions on what it was like to work in our own space and how people were feeling and what was really going on. We really wanted to focus on diversity, equity, and inclusion. And so we used this opportunity to develop a survey for our staff that would ask them a series of questions. We got some really good feedback for our first time around offering this survey. And we learned that there are some opportunities that we need to focus on, such as there's a lot of awareness around what the library is doing for justice and equity and recognition of race and things that happen to do with different populations, but maybe not in some areas, such as political affiliation or gender and sexual orientation. And so we kind of recognize, like, there's some things to work on. There's some things that we've done better than we thought that we were doing, and this is just a stepping point for moving forward. Emily?
So I'm not going to lie, the last 7 years have not always been easy, and creating change is hard. It's also lonely at the top. So find your peers on campus or in the profession, because you do need an outlet. Even a month ago, I was frustrated with how management has taken me away from things about the profession that I love. I didn't feel I was making that much of a difference anymore. And my boss reminded me of how much had changed for the better since my arrival. He reminded me that we had the highest climate survey results over everyone else on campus. Excuse me. It also helped seeing staff who are more engaged in their work and empowered to speak up and see themselves stretch in new ways. So just some lessons learned. You have to get to know people before making changes. I knew on paper some things didn't make sense. I would hear the history of a position or person from different sources, and I needed to learn more about the person from them and watch them over a period of time to form my own opinion. It really helped having support of senior leadership. And this is where the consultants' reports have helped, because it isn't just me saying that we need to fix things. It also helps showing how you're engaging staff, making changes that make them happier and more engaged, because guess what? Other people on campus notice. Address the most pressing problems first. When I started, I made a deliberate choice of learning more about public services because my knowledge wasn't as strong there as it was in collections or systems and cataloging. And I wanted to reassure public services that I cared about them. And I didn't want technical services to feel threatened that I would micromanage them. But I knew deep down that the departments under technical services needed attention. And I didn't dig deep enough to see that I would spend 6 of my 7 years really working in this area. So I should have divided my attention in a way that focused on the most pressing problems. Don't be afraid to make changes in staffing or address performance issues. Throughout the time I first started working in libraries when I was 19 years old, I can say this has been the area that frustrated most of us. First, it isn't fair to the employee and it isn't fair to their coworkers. It is the worst part of being a manager, but is critically important. Some of the hardest days of my career have been ones where I've had to let someone go, and you will never, ever forget those days. But I have seen too many managers let someone coast, and then when someone new comes in, they won't tolerate that. And the person who suffers is the employee and not the manager who's moved on. So work with people on improving their performance through clear expectations and areas that will help them succeed. And sometimes that's all it takes. Be transparent about operations and issues you're fighting. I don't disclose absolutely everything because I want to inspire people and not make them run from the building. But there are times when staff need to see you fighting for the library. Invest in leadership training for yourself and those you want in a management role. If you see someone who has leadership potential, pull them along. Some people are moved into management positions without a lot of training, and help them succeed. And also recognize that while someone is great at their day-to-day job, they may not have the best management skills. State your values. These are the areas where you draw a line. And it's important for people to understand what is important to you so they don't have to guess. Again, change takes much longer than you think. And not everyone will like you. It will bug you. And you have to remain true to your values and stand up for what is right for the rest of the people in the library and the institution. So I definitely want to leave time for Q&A. I see a lot of questions coming in, so we're ready to answer what we can.
Great talk. And yes, we do have a lot of questions. So for all attendees, feel free to like questions that you most critically need to hear an answer for, because I don't know that we'll get to all of them. But starting with the top question, how do you handle transparency if your boss, the provost, often requests or requires confidentiality on many issues, including the budget or building planning?
So sometimes I push back. And I will say we need to be able to give some information to our staff. And fortunately, I would say 99% of the time, our chancellor believes very much in transparency. He holds a lot of campus forums. Actually, I think a lot of people wish that maybe he wouldn't say as much as he does, but I take his lead because I do think it builds that trust. I kind of also say something and then apologize later. Now, obviously, there are some things related to personnel that you can't share, or sometimes I'm told this will come out in the next week or two. And if I know that time frame, then I know that I can hold that out. But I follow up as soon as I can.
Great, thank you. And the next question, do you have any recommendations on how to affect change in culture as a middle manager at a library where the dean/director has created a toxic culture?
Well, I've been in that position many times, multiple times. It's hard. And sometimes you do what you can with your department. So what I've done is I've had to say, I can't change that individual. I can't change what's happening in the rest of the library, but I'm going to focus with the people who work with me, because that's all I can control. And sometimes I have managed up, for example, and what I've hoped is that at least in one position where I really focused a lot on improving the climate in my department, that my counterpart started to take some of the same direction because she saw that other people in the library were noticing. But it is hard. And honestly, I've had to leave positions because I've just been so frustrated. And that's one area where I think talking to people and finding a network of peers, and in some cases, pushing for things with saying, hey, can we look at 360 reviews? I think this might be really helpful. And that's what we did at one institution, hoping that would make the top leadership, the dean or director, understand some of the concerns that people had.
Thank you. And the next question, what is an example of the question of the month, please?
Emily?
The question of the month, those are so fun. Some of the examples recently, like tell us about something that you think everyone else in the library should read or see if it's a movie. What are you most looking forward to in the new space? We just had a renovation. One question that we just popped up in one of our well, let's see. I don't know, what are some of the other ones we've had? Tell us, yeah, something you're most looking forward to in spring.
But also things like, what service do you think that we need to promote more? Or what are some areas that we should highlight, or ways that we can engage with our users? So sometimes it's fun and personal, but most of the time it's connected to the workplace.
Wonderful, thanks. And the next question is for McElroy. Could you give an example of balancing the needs of the institution with management philosophy?
Yeah, so there are times where I sit in meetings and people are making decisions who are making a lot of money. And certainly I'm not, I'm making more money than the staff, but people are making decisions in a vacuum. And so when they're deciding, well, this is what we should do, for example, with the pandemic, I'll give this as an example. With the pandemic and working remotely, there was an expectation, and there still is to some degree, of people using their smartphones to check their status each day. And I've had to repeatedly tell people that not everyone has a smartphone, not everyone has internet access at home. And so that's one area where I see there's just this big economic divide. And so to bring that reality home is one area, for example, that I've had to make some of those. I'm not afraid to speak up in those meetings. And so that's just one example.
Great. Okay, so we've got about 3 minutes more. I'm curious about the elevator speeches both speakers referred to. How was the need for elevator speeches identified, and what were the topics? How did you avoid the culture of staff feeling like their speech was being overseen or controlled by management?
Emily, you led this effort. Do you want to chime in?
Sure. I think some of the things that we tried were really focusing on the parts of the elevator speech, like kind of who are you? What is the thing that you want to talk about? What is the strength that you have here? And then what does this matter to the person who's listening? And so we really helped prep people with elevator speech kind of ideas and templates that were going to be flexible, that could focus on them and be individualized, but also stretch to see like where you are, like physically where you are with a person. What is the service that you might be discussing, or what is the context with which you're interacting with this person, whoever it is. So if it's, you know, I'm hi, yeah, I'm so and so. Yes, this looks like a new great space. Okay. While this is, I'm talking to a dean, what would they be interested in? Like, okay, we can tell them we have so many study rooms and blah, blah, blah. And here's how you connect to that information. We really wanted to get people to think creatively. And we did help them draft a first draft and kind of give that as a little stand-up report, which I think was great for folks to hear a little bit about what everyone else was doing. But we continue to reference this elevator speech as a way to just be concise in communicating with different people, just wherever that shows up. Really leave it to them. Mm-hmm.
And we see this because we do keep a user comment database, and we see the number of people who share feedback or conversations that they overhear walking in the library, walking down the corridors of campus, and everyone kind of owns that. And so I think it's really helped people feel comfortable that, first of all, they're allowed to talk to the chancellor or to a dean or to a student. And so I think it's just really helped.
Great. I'm not sure if we have time for one more. Danny, stop me if we don't.
One more.
Okay. How are you able to make changes to HR processes such as hiring, salary, or equity?
So we are fairly fortunate in that I'm given the budget. And so I get to determine pay for faculty just in terms of managing that within my salary pool. With staff, they do have different levels that are determined by HR. And it really was working with the consultant's report and going and meeting with the Assistant Vice Chancellor for Human Resources to say, look, we really need to make some changes, and to really talk about that. And they were okay with that. They definitely do a market analysis, but we write up really strong justification, and then it's really just managed within my budget. And so as long as I could support that, and it wasn't something that I could take care of in 1 year, it's probably it took about 4 years for pay equity. And I saw a lot of questions coming in about how large we are. We're a staff of 30.
Well, thank you so much, Emily and Emily. This was a fantastic presentation and so many comments going on in the chat and Twitter about how useful this was. So we really appreciate it. And thanks to everyone for coming. We'll see you again in 15 minutes. Enjoy your break.
Thank you.